The airport was crowded that morning, filled with people rushing in every direction. Some dragging heavy suitcases, others holding coffee cups while trying not to spill. In the middle of all that noise and movement, a tall man in simple clothes walked in quietly. He wore a black hoodie, faded jeans, and a plain baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried only one small backpack, nothing that made him stand out, at least not to most people. But this man was not an ordinary traveler. It was Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world, though anyone looking at him right now might have mistaken him for just another tired passenger. Keanu had no bodyguards around him, no assistant following him with a clipboard, no flashing cameras waiting for his arrival. He liked it that way. He had always preferred blending in rather than making a big scene. That morning, he was just trying to make his way through the terminal to pick up his luggage like everyone else. His steps were calm, almost too calm for the chaos that surrounded him. He nodded politely to a couple of people who glanced his way, not sure if they recognized him or not. The loudspeaker above called out for passengers boarding flights to London, Dubai, and New York. Children were crying, while a group of tourists was laughing loudly, and someone dropped a bag of snacks on the floor, scattering chips everywhere. Keanu moved through all of it without any rush, his tall frame almost gliding past the noise. His face was partly hidden, but even then, a few people began to notice something familiar in his walk. In the way he carried himself, near the baggage claim area, a small group of men stood leaning against a pillar. They were clearly not in a hurry to go anywhere. One of them spotted Keanu and narrowed his eyes. At first, he wasn't sure, but then he nudged the man next to him and whispered something. The others turned to look, their expressions changing. As they realized who it might be, they didn't smile. Instead, smirks spread across their faces. They whispered and laughed among themselves as Keanu got closer. Keanu didn't notice them at first. He was thinking about the quiet evening ahead of him, maybe reading a book or playing guitar once he got home. He was not expecting any trouble. But trouble sometimes finds people who least look for it. The group stepped away from the pillar, moving slowly into his path, as if testing whether he would stop. The airport floor echoed with footsteps and rolling suitcases. Keanu's own steps were steady, but his eyes briefly met theirs. He gave a polite nod, thinking it was just another group of curious travelers, but their smirks grew wider. The man in front stayed planted right where Keanu needed to walk, forcing him to slow down. The noise around them felt distant now, almost fading, as if this little moment was about to turn into something larger. Some passengers nearby began to glance over, sensing the shift. They didn't know what was going on, but they could see a stranger blocking another man's way. And then, as Keanu adjusted his cap and tried to step to the side, the man shifted too deliberately, staying in front of him. It was not an accident. It was the beginning of something unpleasant, though Keanu still tried to keep things peaceful in that moment. No one would have guessed how quickly the situation would change, or how much the men would later regret what they were about to do. The man blocking Keanu's way didn't move. Not even when Keanu gave a small, polite smile and said, "Excuse me?" His voice was calm, almost gentle, as if he was speaking to a stranger on the street. But instead of letting him pass, the man tilted his head, studying Keanu like he was prey. Another man from the group took out his phone, holding it up to record, his lips curling into a mocking grin. Keanu could feel eyes on him now, more people beginning to notice that something strange was happening. He wasn't sure if the men recognized him or just decided to pick on a random traveler. Either way, he knew from experience that keeping calm was the best way to handle situations like this. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides, his backpack still slung over one shoulder, and his gaze low. Then the first man spoke, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Aren't you that actor? What's your name again? Oh, right. The one who's not in any good movies anymore. The others laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant in the middle of the busy terminal. Keanu didn't respond. He just tried to step around, but once again, the man blocked him. The one with the phone laughed louder, circling slightly to get a better angle for his recording. Come on, give us a smile, he mocked. Or are you too good for us? His tone dripped with sarcasm, like he was trying to provoke anything for the camera. Keanu's heart was steady. He had been in enough difficult situations to know that giving in to anger would only make things worse. Still, he could feel the tension building. A few nearby passengers slowed down, watching closely, their faces curious but unsure whether to step in. Most people didn't want to get involved, not knowing how serious things might become. The men seemed to feed off the attention. One of them moved a little closer, almost brushing Keanu's shoulder. What's in the bag? He asked in a mocking tone. Is that all you have left? A little backpack? His friends chuckled again, enjoying their own cruelty. Keanu finally looked up, his eyes meeting theirs. He didn't glare, didn't raise his voice. He simply said, I don't want any trouble. Please, let me through. His tone was so calm that it almost made the taunts sound ridiculous. But instead of backing down, the man in front smirked, even wider, as if he had just been given permission to push further. Trouble? Oh no, we're just saying hello, the man replied, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. It's not every day you get to meet a has-been actor. The others burst out laughing again, and the phone camera stayed fixed on Keanu's face, waiting for any reaction that could make the video more dramatic. Keanu took a small step back, not out of fear, but to give himself space. He glanced at the surrounding crowd. Some people were whispering now, a few pulling out their own phones to record. The shift in the atmosphere was slow, but noticeable. People were starting to realize that the quiet man being harassed was someone they might actually know. But the group wasn't done. One of them leaned in slightly, his voice low but threatening. Come on, just say something for the camera. Show everyone you're not as nice as they think. Keanu stayed silent. His silence frustrated them, like they wanted him to snap, to lose his calm. And in that moment, he understood exactly what they were doing. They weren't just being rude. They wanted a reaction that they could twist into their own story later. Still, Keanu didn't give them what they wanted. T stood there, straight and steady, his voice quiet but firm when he repeated, Please, let me through. There was no anger, no fear, just a quiet dignity that made even a few onlookers frown at the men's behavior. The man with the phone gave a small snort, stepping back just half a step as if to let him pass. But Keanu knew better. It was just another game, another chance for them to block him again. And when he tried to move forward, that's exactly what they did. Around them, the noise of the airport continued, boarding calls, rolling suitcases, footsteps, but in that little circle, it felt like the air had thickened. The group had created their own stage, and Keanu was the unwilling main act. What they didn't know was that their stage was about to collapse around them, because in just a few moments, someone in the crowd would recognize exactly who this quiet, patient man was. And their smirks would begin to fade. The moment came. Suddenly, without any warning, Keanu was about to step to the side again when one of the men made his move. With a quick, aggressive shove, he pushed Keanu hard in the chest. The force wasn't enough to knock him to the ground, but it was strong enough to make him stumble backwards into a luggage cart. The cart rattled loudly against the tiled floor, the sound sharp enough to make a few heads turn immediately. For a second, there was silence between them. Keanu steadied himself, his hand gripping the edge of the cart so it wouldn't roll away. His backpack shifted on his shoulder, but he didn't drop it. He didn't lunge forward, didn't raise his hands, didn't shout. His eyes lifted to meet the man's calm, but with something deeper, a quiet disappointment, that seemed to unsettle even the ones still smirking. The man who had shoved him gave a quick laugh, trying to make it look like a joke. Relax, old man. We're just messing around. But there was an edge in his voice, like he wanted to see if Keanu would break. Keanu took a slow breath. Around him, the noise of the terminal returned, but now there was a new tone: gasps, murmurs, and the faint sound of more phones being unlocked and cameras being turned on. People who had been walking past began to slow down, sensing that something was not right. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and stood straight again. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and steady. I said I don't want trouble. There was no anger, no shaking, just a simple truth in his words. But the group didn't stop. The one holding the phone leaned in closer, aiming it directly at Keanu's face. Come on, say something, he sneered. Let's see what you're really like. Another man gave a mock bow and said, maybe he's too scared to talk. Maybe the big movie hero is just a coward in real life. The laughter that followed was louder this time, but it wasn't as confident as before. Keanu looked at each of them in turn. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked. And something about that look seemed to make the air heavier. It wasn't a glare, but it carried a weight, like he was silently asking them if this was really who they wanted to be. Still, they kept going. The man who had pushed him stepped even closer, his tone becoming more aggressive. What? No comeback? No smart line like in your movies. Guess it's harder when no one's paying you to act. He was trying to push for a reaction, any reaction, something that could be twisted later in the videos they were filming. Keanu didn't move back this time. He stood where he was, his posture calm but unshakable. A couple of people in the crowd whispered to each other now, and one woman near the back said quietly, "Wait, I think that's Keanu Reeves." The words didn't reach the men right away, but they reached enough ears in the crowd to start a chain reaction. Meanwhile, the tension was climbing. The phone camera stayed locked on him. The smirks stayed in place, but there was a nervous flicker in their eyes now, like they weren't entirely sure how far they wanted to go. Keanu noticed it, but he didn't say anything about it. He simply took another slow breath, his calmness almost frustrating them more than if he had shouted. Then, someone in the distance raised their voice, cutting through the noise of the terminal. "Hey, isn't that Keanu Reeves?" This time, the words landed like a spark in dry grass. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into small bursts of recognition. A few more phones went up, not to record the bullies, but to record him. The man who had shoved him froze for half a second, his smirk faltering. He glanced around and realized that the attention wasn't just on their little game. Anymore, it was on who their target was. The shift was subtle but powerful. In the eyes of the crowd, this was no longer a nameless passenger being harassed. This was someone they admired, someone known for kindness, humility, and generosity. Keanu still didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at them and said quietly, "Let me get my bag, please." The man stepped back this time, but only slightly, trying to hide the fact that the EHS situation was starting to slip out of his control. The crowd's attention was now fixed on them, waiting to see what would happen next. And in that tense pause, the men began to realize they had just made a mistake, one that the world was about to witness. The atmosphere in the terminal changed the moment that voice rang out, loud enough to cut through the noise of rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and footsteps. "Hey, that's Keanu Reeves." It wasn't just a question, it was said with certainty, as if the person knew exactly who they were looking at. Heads turned instantly. Some people who had been walking toward their gates stopped mid-step. Others leaned around pillars or over railings to see. It was like a ripple moving through the crowd, each person passing the realization to the next. It's him. That's Keanu. Keanu Reeves, here. The men who had been laughing moments ago stiffened. The one holding the phone lowered it slightly, glancing at the others. They had wanted attention, but not this kind of attention. Suddenly, they were no longer in control of the scene. They weren't the ones recording for fun. They were the ones being recorded by dozens of strangers. And those strangers didn't look amused. Keanu didn't react to the sudden recognition. He didn't wave or smile. He kept the same calm expression he had held from the beginning, as though the crowd's reaction wasn't his focus at all. His eyes were still on the men, steady and unblinking, but there was no anger in them, only a kind of patience. As if he was silently waiting for them to decide how they wanted this moment to end. Around them, more phones came up. The sound of camera shutters clicking mixed with the faint chimes of video recordings starting. People whispered to each other about how humble he looked, about how strange it was to see him traveling alone without security, about how he was being treated. The whispers were no longer harmless. They carried judgment, directed at the men who had been blocking and mocking him. The first man, the one who had shoved him, tried to keep his smirk, but it looked weaker now, almost forced. "Come on, we were just joking," he muttered under his breath. But the mutter didn't help, because there were people standing close enough to hear and they weren't buying it. Keanu finally shifted his stance, straightening his back fully. He didn't step forward aggressively, but he did take a slow step toward his bag on the conveyor belt. His voice, when it came, was soft, yet carried easily through the tense silence. "I said, I don't want trouble." It wasn't a threat, it was a reminder, not just to them, but to everyone listening, of how simple his request had been from the start. The man with the phone gave a nervous laugh, glancing around at the crowd. Some of those watching had their arms crossed, their expressions sharp, protective even, as if they wouldn't hesitate to step in if this went any further. Others had their cameras fixed on the scene, making sure every second was recorded. The balance of power had shifted completely. What had started as a small act of cruelty now looked like a public spectacle. And the men were losing control fast. One woman near the front took a small step forward and said loudly, "Why don't you just leave him alone?" Her voice was clear and firm, and a few others nodded in agreement. The tension in the men's faces grew. The one with the phone lowered it a little more, his hand twitching as if he wanted to put it away but didn't want to show nervousness. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to humiliate them in return. He simply picked up his bag from the conveyor and slung it over his shoulder again. His calmness in that moment was almost disarming. It made the men look smaller, weaker, like their energy had burned out now that the crowd was against them. But the damage to their pride had already been done. They could feel the weight of all those eyes on them, the judgment in those stares. The fact that every phone in sight was capturing not their cleverness, but their cruelty. And somewhere deep inside, they knew these videos would spread far beyond this terminal. The murmurs grew louder. But now they weren't whispers, they were comments, said just loud enough for the men to hear. "Unbelievable, who does that to him? Look at the way he's handling it. That's class." Keanu adjusted the strap of his backpack and gave the smallest of nods to the crowd. An unspoken thank you to those who had quietly supported him. Then, with the same quiet pace he had entered with, he began to walk toward the exit. The men didn't stop him this time. They just stood there, the energy drained from their faces, unsure whether to leave quickly or pretend nothing had happened. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew the moment they had been recognized was the moment their arrogance started to crack. Before Keanu could take more than a few slow steps toward the exit, a pair of uniformed security officers appeared from the far side of the terminal. Their dark blue uniforms stood out in the sea of travelers, and the sharp sound of their radios crackling made people step aside to give them room. They were moving with purpose, their eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the group of PTs. Their eyes scanning on the group of men and the tall, calm figure at the center of it. The moment the officers saw Keanu clearly, their expressions shifted. One of them, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, recognized him instantly. "Mr. Reeves," he said with a tone of respect, "are you all right?" His voice was loud enough for nearby people to hear, and the use of Keanu's name made the crowd murmur even more. The bullies froze. Their smirks disappeared completely now. The man who had shoved Keanu looked down at the floor as if wishing it would swallow him whole. The one with the phone quickly lowered it, pressing the screen to stop the recording. For the first time, there was no mockery in their face, only unease. Keanu gave a small nod to the officer. "I'm fine," he said softly. "No harm done." His words were calm, but the crowd could see the truth. There had been harm done. Maybe not physically, but in the way the men had treated him. The second officer, a woman with sharp eyes, stepped closer to the men. "We've had several complaints about your behavior," she said firmly. "Do you understand that harassment is not tolerated here?" Her voice carried authority, and it made the men shuffle their feet uncomfortably. They mumbled something about just joking and not meaning anything by it. But their excuses sounded weak, even to themselves. Meanwhile, more people in the crowd started filming openly. This wasn't just a random incident anymore, it was a scene unfolding. In front of dozens of witnesses, many of whom were already uploading videos online. The knowledge that this could spread beyond the airport made the men even more nervous. The tall officer looked at Keanu again. "Would you like to press charges, sir?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and serious. Everyone knew that if Keanu said yes, the men could be in far deeper trouble than they had imagined when they started their little game. Keanu paused for a moment. T could have said yes. No one in the terminal would have blamed him. He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "Let them go. It's not worth ruining their lives over this." His voice was steady, without bitterness. It was the same calm tone he had used all along. But now it carried something more, a quiet mercy that no one had expected. The officers exchanged a look. They respected his decision, but they still weren't going to let the men walk away without a warning. "You're lucky," the female officer told them sharply. "If this had gone any further, you'd be spending the night answering questions in a holding room. Now get out of here before you cause any more trouble." The men nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact with both the officers and Keanu. Their faces were red not from anger, but from shame. They had gone from loud and cocky to silent and awkward in a matter of minutes. The one with the phone slipped it into his pocket, clearly wishing he could delete more than just the video as the officer stepped aside. Keanu adjusted his cap slightly and gave a polite, almost shy nod to the people watching. He didn't smile broadly, but there was a small warmth in his eyes, as if he appreciated the quiet support from strangers. The crowd didn't cheer loudly. They didn't need to, but a few people clapped softly, and others gave him a nod of crossed, and others gave him a nod of respect as he walked past. The men stood near the pillar for a moment longer, unsure what to do next. They weren't laughing anymore. Their body language had changed completely. Their shoulders were hunched and their hands were restless, like they couldn't stand still. They had wanted to be in control of the moment, but now the moment had taken control of them. The security officers stayed close, making sure Keanu had space to move freely. As he reached the sliding doors leading to the car pickup area, the cool rush of outside air touched his face. He glanced back only once, not at the men, but at the crowd, as if to silently say, "Thank you for seeing what happened inside." The men who had started it all were already feeling the weight of what they'd done. They didn't know yet that the videos would spread fast, that strangers all over the world would soon see their actions. and that their smugness in those first few minutes would vanish under the pressure of public shame. For now, all they knew was that the man they had tried to humiliate had walked away with more dignity than they could ever show. And he had chosen mercy when he could have chosen punishment. The crowd around the baggage claim began to thin as people slowly returned to their own travel plans. But the story was far from over for the men who had harassed Keanu. They stood frozen, still near the pillar where it had all started, their earlier confidence gone. The air felt heavier now, not because of what they had done in the past few minutes, but because of what was coming next. Videos were already being shared. You could see it in the way some travelers were staring at their phone screens, watching the scene they had just witnessed play out again from different angles. Snippets of their voices, their smirks, the shove it, was all captured. And every angle showed the same thing. A group of grown men mocking and pushing a man who had done nothing to them. A man who had only asked to be left alone. The one who had shoved Keanu rubbed the back of his neck. A nervous habit. "This is bad," he muttered to the others. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the arrogance he'd had earlier. Really bad. The man with the phone looked pale. "People are going to recognize us," he said, glancing nervously toward a group of teenagers huddled together, clearly editing a video. They knew they couldn't stop it. Even if they begged the crowd to delete the footage, it was too late. The internet doesn't give back what it takes. What made it worse, the thing eating at them more than the fear of online backlash, was how Keanu had handled it. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't insulted them back. He hadn't even looked at them with hate. Instead, he had done the one thing they didn't expect. He had told the officers to let them go. That mercy hit them harder than any angry words could. They had tried to humiliate him in front of strangers, and in return, he had given them a way out. That choice left them with nothing to fight against, no excuse, no way to paint themselves as victims. All they had now was the truth of their own actions, and it was ugly. One of the men shifted uncomfortably. "Why did he just let us go?" he asked under his breath. Another shrugged, but his voice was shaky. Maybe he's just a better man than we are." No one laughed at that. A few people in the terminal still glanced their way, not with curiosity anymore, but with quiet judgment. Some even shook their heads. It was the kind of silent disapproval that burned more than being shouted at. The man with the phone thought about deleting the video, but he knew it wouldn't matter. Too many others had it. Too many others had seen his face. He could already imagine the captions. "Look how Keanu Reeves handled this," or "When kindness wins over cruelty." And in every one of those videos, he would be the example of the cruelty. Keanu, meanwhile, was gone from sight. He had walked out through the sliding doors and into the waiting area, disappearing into the flow of arriving passengers. There was no dramatic exit, no looking back. He had simply moved on, like the incident was just a small bump in his day. That, more than anything, made the men feel smaller. They began to walk toward the other side of the terminal, not speaking much. The sound of rolling suitcases and airport announcements filled the silence between them. But inside, each of them was playing the moment over again. How they had laughed. How they had blocked his path. How they had shoved him in. How calm he had stayed through all of it. It was easy to mock someone you thought was powerless. It was much harder to face the fact that the person you tried to humiliate had shown more strength than you ever had. They didn't talk about it openly, but the regret settled in like a heavy stone. They knew people would forget their names eventually. But the internet has a long memory. And maybe, even if the world forgot, they wouldn't. Because somewhere deep inside, they already knew this moment would follow them for a long time, not because they had been caught, but because of the way he had chosen kindness when they had chosen cruelty. And that truth was impossible to escape. The men thought it was over. Keanu had walked away, The crowd had started to thin, and security was no longer standing right beside them. They were still embarrassed, still feeling the sting of what had just happened. But they were ready to slip out quietly and disappear into the airport's maze of gates and hallways. But then something unexpected happened. From across the terminal, Keanu's tall figure appeared again. He wasn't rushing, and he wasn't flanked by security. He was simply walking back toward them, the same small backpack on his shoulder, his cap still pulled low. The men froze. For a brief second, they thought maybe he had changed his mind maybe. He was going to demand something, maybe even press charges after all. The crowd, which had just started to break apart, noticed him too. People slowed down, curious to see why he was returning. Phones were lifted again, recording just in case this second encounter turned into something dramatic. Keanu stopped a few feet away from the men. His face was calm, his eyes steady, but there was something different this time, a softness, a kind of quiet understanding that none of them expected. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that one of the men shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat as if to break it. Then Keanu did something none of them saw coming. He extended his hand toward the man who had shoved him. Not in anger, not in mockery. Just a simple handshake. "I hope you both have a better day than this one," Keanu said, his voice low and even. There was no sarcasm, no hidden insult. It was just genuine. The kind of thing you say when you mean it. The man who had shoved him stared at the offered hand. For a second, he didn't move, as if his pride was holding him back. But then, almost reluctantly, he reached out and shook it. His grip was awkward, his eyes darting away from Keanu's. He had expected to be yelled at, maybe even humiliated in return. But instead, Keanu had given him something far more difficult to face: kindness. Keanu turned to the man with the phone and offered his hand as well. The man hesitated, glancing at the crowd of onlookers who were watching closely. Slowly, he shook it. Yeah, he mumbled, not able to find the right words. Keanu's gaze stayed on them just long enough for the message to sink in. He wasn't excusing what they had done. He wasn't pretending it hadn't happened. But he was making it clear that he wasn't going to carry bitterness with him. In that moment, the weight of what they had done felt heavier than before. Because when someone fights back with anger, it's easy to defend yourself, to tell yourself, they deserved it. But when someone meets your cruelty with grace, it strips away all excuses. It leaves you face to face with your own actions. Keanu gave a small nod, then stepped back. "Take care of yourselves," he added, before turning away again. His voice was so steady, so free of resentment, that even the people in the crowd seemed a little stunned as he walked toward the exit for the second time. The air in the terminal felt different. People weren't just recording now, they were watching with respect. A few even clapped quietly again, not in a loud cheer, but in a gentle acknowledgement of the way he had handled everything. The men stood there, hands still slightly tense. From the handshake, watching his back as he disappeared into the distance. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. In just a few short minutes, they had gone from mocking him to fearing him, to being humbled by him. And for the rest of that day, and maybe for many days after, they would remember the feeling of that handshake, not because it was strong, but because it was undeserved. Keanu walked out of the airport for the last time that day, disappearing into the flow of cars and passengers outside. The sliding doors closed behind him, but inside, the moment he had left behind was still alive in the minds of everyone who had seen it. The terminal slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Announcements echoed. People hurried to their gates. Luggage carts rattled over the tiles, but here and there, small groups still whispered about what they had just witnessed. Within an hour, the first videos appeared online. At first, it was short clips, a shaky phone recording of the shove. Another showing Keanu standing calm while being blocked. And finally, the most shared one, the handshake. That last clip spread the fastest. People didn't just watch it. They replayed it, shared it, and commented on how a man with every reason to be angry had chosen to show kindness instead. By the end of the day, the videos had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines read things like, Keanu Reeves handles harassment at airport with pure class, and when kindness defeats cruelty, Keanu's lesson for all of us. Comments poured in from around the world. People talked about how rare it was to see someone stay so calm under pressure, and how that made his actions even more powerful. Meanwhile, the men in the video couldn't hide from it. Their faces were everywhere on social media feeds, in screenshots, in still frames of them blocking Keanu's path or laughing in his face. The internet wasn't kind to them. People called out their behavior, pointing out how unnecessary and ugly it was. The more they read, the heavier the regret became. They had thought, in that moment at the airport, that they were in control. They believed they were just teasing a stranger, maybe getting a funny video to post. But now they realized they hadn't been in control at all. From the moment Keanu had chosen not to fight back, the tone had shifted, and by the time he offered his hand, the story no longer belonged to them, belonged to him, and to the people who saw the dignity in his choice. Keanu himself stayed quiet about it. There were no long interviews, no angry social media posts from him. When asked later by a reporter about the incident, he simply said, "People have bad days. We can't always change what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond." That single sentence was shared thousands of times, quoted on images, printed on posters, and even turned into motivational videos. Back at the airport, a few witnesses who had been there that day told their own stories. Some spoke about how they had felt angry watching it happen, but didn't know how to step in. Others admitted they had pulled out their phones to record without realizing how much it mattered to capture the truth. Almost everyone agreed on one thing. They had never seen someone handle public humiliation with such quiet strength. For the men in the video, the hardest part wasn't the online backlash, it was the memory. The memory of standing in front of a man they had mocked, feeling the weight of his calm eyes on them, and realizing too late that they were wrong. The handshake replayed in their minds over and over. They couldn't explain why it bothered them so much, except that it reminded them of the kind of person they wanted to be, but weren't. At least not in that moment. Keanu, on the other hand, moved on with his life as if nothing had happened. Friends who spoke to him privately said he wasn't holding a grudge. "I've been helped by strangers before," he told one of them. You never know what someone is going through. Maybe they needed a little grace that day. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from the front page, replaced by new headlines and fresh news. But for the people who had been there in person, and for the millions who had watched the videos, it didn't really disappear. It became one of those stories people tell each other when they want to remind someone that kindness can be stronger than anger. That not every fight needs to be won with force, and for the two men, it remained a turning point. They might never have the courage to apologize to Keanu face to face. But they knew one thing for sure. They would never forget the day they tried to take someone's dignity away, and instead, he gave them back a piece of their own humanity. That day at the airport, in the middle of the noise and rush of strangers, Keanu Reeves had taught them, and everyone watching, a lesson that would last much longer than the headlines.